All right, guys, we're officially going to get this panel kicked off. First of all, thank you guys, of course, so much for coming. I'd appreciate it if you could give a round of applause for Lukas, flew all the way from Minnesota. Also, for those of you who don't know, we got to mention Jeffrey as well, marketing manager for Fantasy Flight Games. Nobody knew he was here, just skirting around the outside. These guys flew down here and made this day really special for all of us. We appreciate you guys coming and appreciate you two for making it what it is. And Lukas, we're going to get it kicked off here just with some light questions. We're going to talk about Awakenings for a second. We're going to talk about Spirit of Rebellion. And then we're going to talk about the kind of progression of the game and some of your more conceptual ideas for it. So to kick it off, Frank Scott, who's one of our audience members here and a local here in Tulsa, asks, did you expect this game to be so popular, personally? Go ahead, yeah. You can grab it.
All right.
Yeah, it's
all
awkward.
Right. Yeah, it's a little bit. All right. That's a good question. I honestly didn't have a whole lot of expectations when I started working on the game. I mean, it's Star Wars, so you expect it to sell. But there was kind of a sense as we were leading up to the release of the game that it's like, there's not a lot of hype surrounding the game. There's not maybe a lot of pre-orders. And so it's like, then you're beginning to think like, oh no, did I create a game that no one's going to want, that no one's going to buy? Is this the end of my career or something? Like, who knows what runs through your head. But it has definitely exceeded my expectations. Like, I always thought it was a fun game. I thought it was an approachable game. But just the response once people try the game has been really exciting and has definitely been more positive than I ever anticipated or hoped for.
Nice. Well, with that, so you've seen Awakenings play through, right? We saw you at Worlds, and that was kind of the final test of Awakenings. Is there any deck there that did better than you expected, that surprised you in the Awakenings meta, that was like, wow, look at this thing. I didn't expect this thing to get this far?
I mean, it was really exciting to have like 8-9 different decks kind of in the top 16 at Worlds. I will say the Leia Akbar deck was a surprising entry into the top 16. Used It's a Trap to kind of try to get a lot of range damage out on the board. Also, I think even though a lot of people expected Vader Raider, I did not think that it would do as well as it did, but the deck that did well was actually a very different build than most people were playing at the time, since it used a lot of cheaper cards, Boundless Ambition, and to drop more, and so that deck is very strong. Daniel Weiser actually played against his metamate in the top 4, who was running the exact same deck, and beat him to get to the final. So we almost had like a final of Vader Raider versus Vader Raider. So that deck is very good. That was a little bit surprising. I didn't expect to see anybody play that variant of it and do so well. Zach Bunn's deck obviously was pretty exciting as well. Only 8 upgrades in it, worked out all day up until the top 4, and then it kind of crapped out on him a little bit. But
totally.
It was still pretty entertaining to watch, and that was an exciting build too. So
nice. That one was from Trey Desmukes, by the way. This one's coming from Jason Griffin. So let's fast forward to Spirit of Rebellion. You've actually got it in the wild now, and this has got to be kind of stressful, right? Because you get this entire set of cards out, and you then look and say, are people doing weird stuff with this that I didn't expect? Is there any deck combos that are surprising to you now that you've seen SOR out in the wild? Aside from the one you errated?
Aside from the ones that we already errated, I'd say no. The rest of it kind of remains to be seen. There's definitely things that we want to watch with the interactions of Spirit of Rebellion cards and kind of how it shakes out. But yeah, definitely missed some things. Playtesting is a process, and sometimes we don't always catch everything. But I do want to be proactive in making sure that we make sure that the game remains healthy and remains fun to play. And so that's definitely something that we'll do kind of going forward. But right now it's a little bit too early to see, kind of what will shake out. And, we just finished the Awakenings meta. The Spirit of Rebellion meta has just started. There's so many different character combinations to explore. It's going to be really exciting to see what people come up with. And I'm sure there will be a lot of surprises along the way.
This one will come from me then. When you were doing Netrunner, it was kind of like the golden, no restriction, no errata, no restricted list, nothing. And now you've literally errated cards before they have come out. So how did your perspective change so drastically between designing those two games?
Yeah, I think I learned a lot from Netrunner, and I think one of the things with Netrunner was a lot of times a card would come out or a deck would arise, and people would be like, "Oh, this is a problem." And it's like, yes, we know it's a problem, and we actually have some counter cards since Netrunner is kind of heavy on counter cards and safety valves in the meta. There are actually counter cards coming out that will fix the problem, so it's like we should just let the meta fix itself over time. And in some cases, those counter cards weren't strong enough. In other cases, by the time that those cards come out, everybody's moved on to play something else. And so it's actually a different problem that they're complaining about. So like the sky was always falling, but it was always falling in a different way. And so it's actually, I think in this case, from now on, really important to not wait on cards to fix problems because it takes too long. Our development cycle is too long to just release cards to allow the card pool to kind of heal itself. And so that's kind of why you see the shift to doing more errata now.
Nice. So you first designed this game, and it's a prototype, and you're passing it around. You got D6s labeled probably with stickers and that kind of a thing. And now we have actually 2 sets out in the world that people are using, and you're getting to see these games actually happen. How has that shifted your perspective? How has that perspective shifted since you first designed this game? That's a question from Matt Phillips.
It is always kind of interesting when you start working on a game. It's almost a purer game because like you don't have any art on the cards. You don't even, in this case, have like pretty dice or anything. You just have like little D6s that you're rolling around. You start scrawling and scribbling on cards and changing things. And so, you get a really good sense of the game, and then you begin to add all these things on top of it, and you realize that like, wow, the game is actually really thematic now that I can actually see all these things on the table too. You're like, I can feel it, but like now I can really feel it, and like the tactile nature of like picking up the dice and not having to like refer back to some reference sheet just makes the game play so much faster. And so the game definitely plays a lot faster than it does when we were testing the game originally during the prototyping stage, and I think that's a good thing because we want the game to play fast and we want games to be over quickly.
Great segue into this question here from Ryan. Is the pace of Destiny, especially post Spirit of Rebellion, is this the pace that you were intending the game to have? Was Awakening slower than intended? Or is Spirit getting it caught up? Or is Spirit faster than intended? Tell us about the pacing.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think that the pacing is about right for Spirit. It is a little bit fast with certain combinations, such as like Maz Poe, and so that's definitely something that we'll kind of watch and see how it develops. But I don't want games to last more than like 4 or 5 turns on average. I think that's a pretty good amount of rounds to do kind of what your strategy intends. And you also don't want to get to a point where you have a lot of heavy control decks in the meta, because then it'll just be like really, really slow. And right now we have a best of 3 tournament format for the cut, and so being able to play 3 games within that time period is really important as well. Also, like when you look at tournament players, they play much faster than casual players. And so we also want to make sure that the experience seems fast for casual players. And so like the decks at tournaments will play even faster than the decks that a lot of people are playing outside of tournaments, but we want to make sure that their experience feels fun, fresh, and doesn't take like 45 minutes to play. Whenever you see somebody who actually sits down and like demos the game for the first time, or like brings out the starter decks for the first time, it actually takes a lot longer for them to play through than it does, once you're an experienced player. And their decks aren't going to be as optimized or as fast as they start building their own decks. And so like by having a faster tournament game, we also have a slower but still fast enough casual game. That's really important.
So Chris Johnson wants to know if you're concerned about ammo belt and second chance, right? So this is kind of one of the bogeymans of the set. It's kind of rolling around there. It's a character can last forever. That doesn't seem right. What do you think about that?
I would say yes, I am concerned, but it's too early to actually make any determination if anything needs to happen with that combo particularly. Like there are ways to beat it, there are ways to kind of deal with it. Obviously, it is a feel-bad moment when you see somebody with like an ammo belt and a second chance on them, and then they recur the ammo belt and play it again. So it's definitely something that if we have to deal with, we will deal with it. But I think it's a little bit too soon since the meta just shifted and like Spirit of Rebellion just came out to like start nuking something that might be a problem without actually knowing whether or not it is.
Well, Wes Brown would like to know a very important question for all of us. It seems like you guys love villains and absolutely hate heroes. And the reason for this is that there's actually the numbers work out where there's just a drastically larger amount of realistic villain combos than there are hero combos. So is that something that is intended? Does it have to do with Rey? Tell me everything, Lucas, about this.
I mean, obviously the dark side of the Force is very, very corrupting influence and rather attractive. But I'd say for the most part, it's not intentional. It just happens, I think, the way that the character points break down. Like, we don't necessarily always look at the hero side and the villain side completely as separate card pools. Like, each character has to pull its own weight and cost its own points. And so sometimes that means that you won't have certain holes filled within each side, and you won't see certain combinations be viable. So it might seem that villains have an upper hand right now, but even at Worlds, like half the decks were heroes, and so I think there are going to be a lot of good builds on each side, and hopefully as more cards come out, we will see it even out over time.
That takes us nicely into questions from PJ Ellis and Daniel Ward, basically asking the same question, which is the process of designing a character, specifically how you get at the point cost. How do you go through that process? What's it like?
Yeah, so the first thing that we did when kind of trying to figure out the points cost of the characters is, we had to decide on how many points we wanted in the game, and we ended up at 30, kind of because it was a nice symmetry with 30 cards in the deck. And we also tried out other point totals, and it just didn't quite break down the way we wanted it to. And so after that, we decided that we would design a Stormtrooper, which was 7 points, and that would be the low end. And then we'd design Vader, which would be the high end, and put him, about 21, 22 points, somewhere around there, so that he could run with a Stormtrooper. And so we kind of designed those two characters, and then we started filling in the middle in between them. So game design is a lot of art and science. You do use number crunching to get you close to certain ballparks, but once you throw special abilities and different context and characters into the mix, you have to rely a lot on your playtesters to kind of give you good feedback. You have to rely a lot on your intuition to figure out whether or not something is costed correctly. You have to just kind of see over time whether or not it feels like it's worth it. And so in some cases, like with Finn, we were a little bit too conservative. I was definitely concerned that he would get better over time, and so he was overcosted in points at 13, 16. But on other cases, I think we got really close for the points. Dice and health is always going to be tricky because some people will value health more, some people will value dice more, and I don't think it's always one is better than the other. It really depends on what kind of dice. So there's no secret formula to figure out how much a character should cost once you take into account its ability and its health and its dice. But we do kind of have archetypes of characters, and once you have a lot of characters, you can start comparing the characters to each other. And so that's something else that's very helpful, is making comparisons between characters of equal cost to make sure that they seem viable and that they seem to be on the same level and that one isn't better than another.
So moving on to kind of the conceptual design of the game, D-Rod had a question: what character or story moment had the biggest influence on the design of Destiny? So if you think about you as a person, obviously, we all have our favorite kind of moments and stories from Star Wars. Was there anyone for you that really influenced the game?
I don't know if there was one moment in particular, but when I first started working on the game, I did sit down and I started brainstorming what is Star Wars, and I made a list of a bunch of things such as losing limbs and John Williams and TIE fighters, things like that. And so not everything gets in the game. You'll have to add John Williams yourself, sadly, but there are certain things that are very iconic about Star Wars, and so there wasn't really one moment in particular that I latched onto as yes, this is what the game is about. It was a lot of smaller moments that are kind of compounded over time through the movies and even the TV shows, and now we have comics and all of these other great things. But I can't say that there's one moment in particular other than that the game is inspired by a face-off between characters and between potentially a team of characters. So anytime you have the heroes going into the Death Star and you have them kind of trying to rescue Leia, or you have Luke and Vader facing off, it's those are kind of the moments that we wanted to capture in the game, but also to add the what if twist of what if Jabba had a jetpack and a flamethrower, and then you try to face him.
That's a really good transition here into Ray Lahan's question. He asks, what's the story behind the dice in Destiny? Specifically, like, what story are they creating in your perspective whenever you're resolving a resource or a disrupt? And sometimes, in a lot of games, it can seem out of theme for those kinds of things to happen. How do you view the story happening through the dice in Destiny?
Well, it's very important to make sure that the dice kind of drive a lot of the action, and so we're very careful to not make a lot of cards that deal direct damage to characters, because then it's just like you're ignoring the dice part of the game, and that's the action part of the game. It's kind of like you're just ending the story a page too soon if you don't have to actually play or activate a character and roll in to resolve their dice. You just play a card from your hand and end it. So I think the dice in a lot of ways are kind of the back and forth action. The events in your hand are kind of more of the surprise twists and turns that you do to the dice. So the dice are active participants, but they're also acted on by the cards. And so it's very important to make sure that the dice remain kind of the integral part that drive the game forward, drive the action of the game forward, drive the interaction between players. And in that way, you kind of have a story develop just with the back and forth nature of I'm taking resources to charge up my lightsaber, which is I'm getting ready for a strike, and then you do something to disrupt me, which might be knock the lightsaber, or kick my leg down, or you can think of it as in all of these different ways. But I definitely think of resources as very abstract. Even disrupt can be somewhat just abstract depending on what you're doing, but you also just have damage, and damage is damage, and these characters are really going at each other.
Frank Scott has to know how soon we're going to get Ewoks.
We already have Ewoks. There's a whole village of them. And if you want more, you might have to wait a little bit longer.
Dan has a question. Are we going to see more recursion in the game? This is a fascinating question, Lucas, because when we first spoke, I think, on camera about Destiny, you said to me, there's a bunch of lessons I've learned from my time with Android Netrunner. And one of those lessons is recursion is generally too strong and bad for a game. So I think we're all dying to know, are we going to see more of it?
Absolutely. Doubling down on recursion. So yes, we will see more recursion, but the importance is that we see well-costed recursion. Recursion itself is not a bad thing. Recursion you do have to be incredibly careful with, and obviously I was not careful enough with it in this game either, even though I thought I would be. It's a dark, seductive power, that recursion. You throw cards in your discard pile, and you're like, what if I could play them again? It seems so much fun. There's only 2 copies of a card. I want that third copy. So we will see more recursion. The problem right now, though, is just the fact that some of the recursion, claiming the battlefield, is a little bit too easy because there's not actually a cost other than just doing it before your opponent. So then you can start with the Starship Graveyard, getting back certain cards. But recursion itself is never actually a problem. It's always the cards that are recurred that are the main problem. And so we will see more of it, but we'll just be more careful with what kind of interactions they have with other cards.
Great answer. So I'm going to ask you 3 questions that relate to your personal preference when it comes to Destiny. The first is, what is your favorite character in the game? The second, that's from Grant McKinney. The second is from Ben Ruggles. What character are you most excited out of the game? And the third, from Grant McKinney, what is your favorite archetype currently for a deck?
Choosing favorites is impossible. I can't really choose favorites, especially when you have 300 plus cards in the set. Now we have
I had a favorite Pokemon.
2 full sets. I don't even have a favorite Pokemon, no. Definitely not. I would say some of my favorite characters are just personally that I enjoy playing with are Padawan, and I also like the new Nines, even though he's kind of crazy. My favorite archetype is definitely Mill. I like trying to make Mill work. I like trying to make control work. Padme is a great character because you don't actually need a lot of Mill cards in your deck. You just need control. And a lot of times when people build Mill decks, they just kind of put a lot of Mill cards in, but you really need 80% control and then just a little bit of Mill to finish it off. And so I do like playing control archetype. I do want it to actually be a viable archetype in the game. But on the other hand, I've also been playing like Darth Vader and FN 2199, and that's an incredibly fast aggro deck, and that's also pretty enjoyable. So I kind of go for the extremes. I go for like a really long control deck or a really fast aggro deck. I don't play a whole lot of tempo decks or kind of mid-range decks.
Anything you want to add to the game? What are you most excited to add?
What am I most excited to add to the
Yoda?
game? As far as characters?
Yeah.
I mean, I think Ewoks are the thing I'm least excited to add to the game. And I would say that Gungans are the thing that I'm most excited to add to the game.
Really drawing a line in the sand there. Zach wants to know, what Destiny card was the most difficult to design?
I don't think a lot of cards are difficult to design, but they are difficult to develop, so I'll assume that it's kind of wrapping them all together in one. It's easy to design cards, you just throw ideas out there and then see if they break. Was there a card that went through more iterations than every other card? Probably. But it's hard to remember because I don't usually try to tweak a card all that much if it's not working. If it's not working, I'll just throw it out and try a different idea kind of entirely. So I have a very iterative process where I start working on a card, toss it out if it doesn't work, and kind of keep going. There are some cards that keep getting kind of pushed back from one set to another set. So there are some cards that we haven't ended up in a set for various reasons. And so I guess some of those maybe are the hardest to design because we haven't actually gotten them in a point where we feel like it's good for the card or good for the game to put it out. But I think characters are probably some of the easiest cards to design, and battlefields are the hardest card to design. There's just not much space when there are battlefields on the table because there is no cost associated with it. You just have a very narrow range of abilities that you can put on a battlefield. So any battlefield is probably going to be the hardest card to design because you can compare it to every other battlefield and it has to make sense within that comparison.
Mm-hmm. That leads actually to a good question from Drayton here. He's asking if theme or mechanics are more important to design, and I actually would pull up Poe as an example of this, right? So you have kind of a thematic reference in that you can only bring the vehicles into play, but you can discard any card. And so you can have, Poe discarding a Force Choke or a Force Lightning, whatever it is. So how much of, where are the sliders on theme and mechanics?
That's a good question. I think in Destiny's case, I always try to start out with theme for the most part if I can, and kind of think about what I am representing within the card pool and kind of try to go from there to make sense of it. Obviously, it goes both ways. You'll start sometimes cards with a bottom-up design, which means that you start with the mechanics, or a top-down design, which means you start with the theme, and then you kind of refine the idea by figuring out, what the other part of it needs. So if I start with somebody like Poe, which is more of a thematic design because he's kind of, potentially using vehicles and, as you were saying, some other things. But say the idea starts out with him using vehicles, and it's like, oh, this is pretty good, but if I don't have a vehicle in hand, then his special is blank. And so the first turn of the game, he might have a blank special, and that actually isn't very fun, especially if I got him in a pack and I wanted to try him out, and now, I have to collect all these vehicles, and there aren't that many vehicles in the first set. And so, his idea started with, let's do cool things with vehicles, and then kind of expanded because it just wasn't good enough for the card, and it led to situations where you felt like the special wasn't very special. And we want to make sure that the special is always kind of one of the more exciting sides on the card. And so we needed to expand it and make it a little bit more generically useful than just interacting with vehicles. So it started out as a thematic design, and then the mechanics forced it to be a little bit more of a general design that allows him to use things like Force Throw. And so I think you'll see a lot of instances of that where sometimes you start out with an ability that is supposed to be thematic and then it kind of moves and shifts based on what the game needs. But I try to start with the theme first and then kind of go from there.
All right, well, I think a lot of us want to know the next question. Eric Wainwright is the official asker, but how will rotation happen in Destiny? Or is that a weird assumption to make?
I don't think it's a weird assumption to make. I think rotation is very healthy for games. I think you will see rotation. We're not ready to announce anything specific about rotation right now, other than that, it's healthy. It's the natural rhythm of a competitive game is to have some sort of rotation. Our living card games have rotation after about 6 or 7 sets. So I don't expect you'll have to wait that long for Destiny, but you won't have to wait like 6-7 years for Destiny like it is with those. But we'll definitely are looking at our options, and I imagine at some point you'll hear more from us on that.
I imagine that as well. Will we ever get another die symbol in the game? Like a card draw or something similar?
Odds are pretty good.
All right. Well, I wasn't ready for that quick of an answer. Will the dice always be 6-sided only?
Yes.
Oh, we got something, guys. All right, now we know. What about other formats of Destiny? Do you have any plans for like a sealed draft, any kind of formats that you're officially supporting, like at Worlds or somewhere similar?
Well, it's pretty exciting to see some people doing draft right now. How do you guys like it? Pretty fun? Yeah? Pretty interesting? Definitely changes things up a little bit. So draft was a very requested format early on. People are like, where's draft? Where's draft? What are the plans for draft? And then the game came out and nobody could actually buy any product. And so then all those questions started disappearing. Before you know it, nobody's asking about draft anymore because there's no packs to buy to draft with. So now that people are getting more packs, I imagine that question will come up more. That is something that we're interested in introducing to the game. We just have to do it right. We want to make sure that we give players a really good experience. That's definitely something I like to see. I'm a big fan of draft, and I'd like to even see something like a 2v2 team format. But we want to make sure that any format that we introduce to the game is well thought out and implemented correctly to give players the best experience, and so it doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. All right, well, guys, I think hopefully we've gotten some good information here tonight. I do actually want to. I kind of told myself I wouldn't do this, but do you guys have any? Is there anybody out there who has any additional questions after hearing this, Frank? What do you got?
Will there ever be neutral characters?
Will there ever be neutral characters? So currently we do not have that. We have villains and heroes only.
It's definitely possible. I mean, that space is open to be designed in. It's very risky to design neutral characters because if you make a neutral character that's too good, then now all of a sudden it can appear in every single deck pretty much for all time. So that's definitely something that I imagine at some point we will want to explore that space. But right now I'm pretty happy with like the dark side, hero villain sort of split.
Back in the back row. When are we getting Rebels?
Well, we did reveal that Sabine Wren is in Empire at War, which is set 3, so that will be the first instance of Rebels content in the game.
How's that? Is that awesome?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Anybody else? Way back in the back, Grant?
So if we're getting a core set every year, are there any plans to either do direct reprints or functional reprints of any of those?
Base sets, you said? On like the base sets every year? Yeah, can you just tell us kind of how those are going to function, those base sets? The fourth one's the first one, right?
Is the question about reprinting the sets or reprinting cards in the set?
Cards, yeah.
Sure. So that is something that I don't have any information for you on right now. That is something that we are thinking about and considering how we want to approach it, but there is nothing I can tell you about reprinting actual cards and sets right now.
Cool. Anyone else? Any questions? Well, Lukas, thank you so very much. Lukas will be here, of course, all weekend, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask him then. And I will go ahead and tell you, for anybody who is maybe going to be out tomorrow, we are going to go to McNelly South after the tournament tomorrow. So you guys are all welcome to join out there. We'll just go out there and have a good time after the tournament's wound down and the store closes. So hope you guys come out there. Thank you guys so much, and have a great weekend. Thank you.